Hello everyone, my name is Mike Harding. I'm a plant pathologist with Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation. My title is Crop Assurance Lead, and what that means is that I monitor and survey for diseases in our crops in Alberta. And I'd like to thank the County of Grande Prairie for inviting me to present some information on what happened in 2025 with respect to diseases in our crops. And I'm going to try to do that by showing you some maps and some graphs and some numbers that will kind of tell the story of what we found in crops in 2025. So I'm going to turn my camera off so that it doesn't obstruct the view of the information on the slides. I want to acknowledge folks that have helped with this survey, and so I'm not in every field in Alberta, but I rely on a network of folks that help us to collect information to give us an idea of what's happening. And so I do have some staff in Brooks, where I work in Brooks, Alberta, Greg, Blake, Rhodesia, and Tanner. And so these are folks that are out in the field most days looking for symptoms and collecting samples. We also have other folks at Alberta Ag and Irrigation, mostly at the Plant Health Lab in Edmonton, led by Dr. Jia Feng. And his staff include Yalong, Hiting, Junyi, Kier, Ron, Shiming, Jessica, Thiessen, and Will. So a lot of what I'm going to show you is information generated by folks at Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation, but we also have other collaborators, and these are usually other plant pathologists that are also interested in diseases in the field. And so we have collaborators at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, at Lethbridge, Lacombe, and Beaver Lodge. We also have collaborators at the University of Alberta, Western Crop Innovations, and Lakeland College. And I want to make special mention of our two largest surveys that we do in Alberta are the canola survey and the wheat head survey. And these surveys are done kind of on the backs of our agricultural fieldmen in each county and municipality and special area in Alberta. And so a big shout out to ag service boards across the province that help with those two very large surveys. So with that, I'm going to move into telling you about what we found in 2025. And I'm going to start with canola diseases. And we're going to cover blackleg, clubroot, sclerotinia, and verticillium. So blackleg in canola is our most commonly occurring disease in canola in Alberta. And so in 2025, this map here shows you the locations of the fields that were visited. We visited 395 fields. We try to get to 1% of acres in each county or municipality. And the legend here has different colored dots. So the darker the dot, the higher the blackleg severity, with the lightest yellow being 0 to 1 and the darkest red being a 4 to 5 on a 0 to 5 scale for blackleg severity. And what you can see is that most of the fields that we visited, 98.2% of fields, had some blackleg. And about 44 or 45% of the plants that we evaluated had blackleg. Now, the clubroot data, we participate in this survey, but the survey is led by Dr. Steven Strelkoff at the University of Alberta. So these numbers that I'm showing you for clubroot come from Steve. And in 2025, we found clubroot in 7.6% of the fields that we visited, and on about 1.9 or 2% of the plants that we evaluated. Sclerotinia was present in 48.1% of fields and 8.1% of plants. And verticillium was found on just under 1% of fields and less than 1% of plants. So that gives you kind of an idea of what the situation in Alberta was like for the kind of our four major diseases in canola. And I will say that for some of these, like blackleg and clubroot, we do have some severity data. And I can tell you that most fields, even when there's a significant amount of blackleg symptoms, they're usually not very severe. So some fields do have severe blackleg, but most fields don't. And you can see that here in the map, that most of these dots are light yellow, meaning that the severity is low. And so even though it's a concern that we have high levels of blackleg in all of our fields, or in the province, we have high levels of blackleg in the province, the severity is very low for the most part. Similarly, for sclerotinia, we found sclerotinia in more fields than we were expecting to find it, but generally speaking, there were few plants with symptoms, and the symptoms weren't that severe. So now what I want to do is zoom in on the Peace region. So I've showed you the results from all 395 fields in Alberta. Now I'm going to just look at the 82 fields in the Peace region that were evaluated for blackleg. So on this slide, I have a bar graph, and on the vertical axis, this is the percent of fields positive or prevalence. And then on the horizontal axis, I've got the 4 diseases: blackleg, clubroot, sclerotinia, and verticillium, with the blue bars representing all of the Alberta data and the orange bars representing the 82 fields in the Peace region. And so we can see there was essentially no difference for blackleg in the Peace compared with the Alberta average. There was a slightly higher clubroot, and this is because there's a large area of southern Alberta that doesn't have clubroot at this time. And so not surprising, kind of if we went to anywhere else in Alberta and focused on clubroot, we'd see more than the average, except for southern Alberta. For sclerotinia, we found slightly higher prevalence of sclerotinia in the Peace region. And for verticillium, again, slightly higher than the Alberta average. So a lot of these numbers, while they appear like they might be higher, they're pretty similar. So it's not like the Peace region is, has got some kind of runaway situation or anything that we need to push any panic buttons about. But on average, Alberta had a little lower clubroot, sclerotinia, and verticillium. So this graph is showing things in the same format, except that it's incidence, or the percent of plants with symptoms, rather than prevalence. And so the percent incidence of blackleg was slightly higher, clubroot was slightly lower, sclerotinia was the same, and we don't calculate incidence in our verticillium survey, so there's no information to show there. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the difference between some of these diseases in Alberta and compared with the Peace region. So I'm going to show you now some trends over the years. So this is prevalence, or percent of fields, on the vertical axis, and then years along the horizontal axis. And then the red line is blackleg, the green line is sclerotinia, the blue line is clubroot, and the yellow line is verticillium. And so what this graph tells us is that blackleg is our most prevalent disease, usually followed by sclerotinia, but very weather driven. So in some years, the sclerotinia levels are low, usually based on moisture around flowering or coming into flowering. And then the prevalence of clubroot doesn't change a lot. We usually find somewhere around 10% of fields positive just about every year. But we'll talk a little bit more about spreading of clubroot. This doesn't tell us about the spread. This tells us about how many fields we find each year. And then finally, verticillium, we found it for the first time in our survey in Alberta in 2023, and we had a larger number of fields, around 7% of fields positive, and then back down to around 1% of fields in 2025. And this number will probably fluctuate year to year, just like all the other diseases are doing. But we suspect the trend is going to be that verticillium will increase in prevalence over time. On the right is the map that's produced by Dr. Steven Strelkoff's group, showing the cumulative number of infested fields. And so you can see the Edmonton area is kind of where we have the most number of cumulative cases, and then spreading out from there, including a number of municipalities in the Peace region at this time. So I'm going to shift gears now and talk a little bit about some cereal diseases. And for one of these, I'm going to be able to compare the Peace region with all of Alberta, and the other one, I'll just have the Alberta data, and I'll explain that when we get there. So what I have here is 5 diseases: fungal leaf spots, stripe rust, powdery mildew, wheat streak mosaic, and bacterial leaf streak. And then I have the percent of fields positive, the percent of stems positive, and then I only have severity for the leaf spots, and it's a percent leaf area damaged or percent leaf area diseased. And so whatever percent area of the flag leaf has symptoms, that's what this number represents. And so the map on the right shows you the locations of the 250 fields that we visited in 2025, and the dots are colored based on the percent leaf area damaged. So if there's 0 to 10% of the leaf area with symptoms, that's the lightest yellow, and then moving up, the darkest red is between greater than 50% of the leaf area damaged is the darkest spots. And so in Alberta, we had about 95% of our fields with fungal leaf spots, about 35% of the leaves. Sorry, this says stems, it should say leaves. And the average severity was about 11.5%. Just over 5% of the wheat fields in Alberta had stripe rust. Almost 3% had powdery mildew. Over 8% had wheat streak mosaic, and bacterial leaf streak was present in 4% of fields. So if we compare that to the Peace region, what do we find? Well, we find that fungal leaf spots were a little bit lower in prevalence, and we generally don't see a lot of stripe rust, powdery mildew, bacterial leaf streak, or wheat streak mosaic in the Peace region. These are much more common in southern Alberta, but there was a little bit of bacterial leaf streak reported, I think from one of the 45 fields in the Peace region. So this gives you an idea. So for the canola story, things were, slightly higher for some of the diseases, and for wheat in 2025, there was a little less disease in the Peace region. And here are the trends. So this is prevalence or percent of fields positive, years on the horizontal axis, and then the blue line is fungal leaf spots, the orange line is stripe rust, the yellow line bacterial leaf streak, and the gray line wheat streak mosaic. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of how these diseases fluctuate from year to year. But in some cases, like blackleg in canola and fungal leaf spot in wheat, they're very prevalent. We find them in most fields to at least some level every year. Okay, now there's another wheat disease I want to talk about. This is actually from a separate survey. So we do a wheat foliar survey, kind of just right around heading, and we evaluate the flag leaves for symptoms. But then we also come back to not the same fields necessarily, but we come back to other wheat fields in the fall, and we collect mature wheat heads and we evaluate them for head diseases. And one of the things we evaluate for is ergot. And we had quite a few questions about ergot this year, and so I just want to share in case anyone was interested in what we found. So we did see ergot in 2025 in quite a few fields, but if we look at the trend for ergot, we can see that there is fluctuation of the amount of ergot that we find in wheat heads. And 2025 was kind of an average year as far as the percent of fields with ergot. So around 9% in 2025, which was very close to what it was in 23 and 21. And 25 was a little worse than 24, but not as bad as 2022. I'm talking about the percent of fields with ergot, okay? But I want the story for ergot in Alberta in 2025 is actually shown in this graph. Let's look at the one on the left. So this is prevalence of field, percent of field. So this is the same data that I showed you in the previous slide, but just in a bar graph, where 2022 was the worst year, 2024 had the least, and then 21, 22, and 25 were all around 9 to 15%. Okay, so, but now let's look at the severity of ergot. And this is determined by the weight of ergot in the sample. So we weigh the whole sample, and then we weigh the ergot bodies, and we can calculate the percent of the sample that's made up of ergot bodies. And what you can see is that in 2025, we had the highest severity of any of the last 5 years that we've been doing this survey. So even 2022, when there were way more fields, the severity of ergot was much higher in 2025. So what these data told us was that we didn't have necessarily a high number of fields with ergot, but the ones that did have it had a lot of it. Okay, I'm gonna just show you a quick slide here on barley foliar diseases. And we've got scald net blotch, loose smut, stripe rust, and bacterial leaf streak. And we also looked at ergot, but again, remember this was at heading, so ergot may not have fully developed, and we may have missed it in this survey. And so here are the numbers. These are photos of symptoms of bacterial leaf streak and scald on the left, and then the map showing the 201 fields that we visited. And again, percent leaf area damaged is the severity value, and the lighter dots have less severity and the darker dots have more. And these are the numbers. These are the percent of fields that were positive for these diseases. And so I'll just give you a minute to look at this if there's any of the diseases you're specifically interested in. I want to tell you that because we don't lead this survey is led by Dr. Kelly Turkington. I don't have the raw data for it, so I can't separate out the barley foliar diseases in the Peace region. So this is all I can show you is the Alberta averages. And I can show you the trends. And so the barley disease trends don't change as much as the canola and the wheat trends do. The only thing we have here is in this other leaf spots category. This would be leaf spots other than the ones that are listed here, like net blotch, scald, bacterial leaf streak, and stripe rust. So those are the trends for barley diseases. And now we will shift into pea diseases. And I'll show you information for root rot and ascochyta. And then we have presence or absence for downy mildew, bacterial blight, and white mold. And so this slide again is set up similar to the ones I presented before. Here are symptoms of photos on the left, and then the prevalence, incidence, and severity. So this is percent of fields, percent of plants, and the severity. And then this is the map showing the 103 pea fields that we visited in Alberta. And so root rot was the most prevalent and had the highest incidence. Ascochyta blight was next. And then we found one field with downy mildew at very low incidence, and we didn't find any white mold or bacterial blight. So how does that compare with the Peace region? So this is the percent of fields positive. For root rot, blue bar is Alberta, the orange bar is the Peace region. So there was slightly higher prevalence of root rots in the Peace compared with the rest of Alberta. But for all the other diseases, the Peace region had almost none or none. So it was only root rots that seemed to be a real problem in the Peace region in peas in 2025. And this is the same thing, but with incidence or the percent of plants. And it tells the same story, that there were more pea roots with root rot in the Peace comparatively when we look at the Alberta average. So root rots are a problem in peas, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. And these are the trends. Root rot is always the most commonly occurring disease in peas, with Mycosphaerella or Ascochyta kind of bouncing around, very weather driven. And some years it's as bad as root rot, and some years it's much, much less prevalent. Okay, so let's finish up with what we need to kind of take from this information and watch for in 2026. And so for me, the three that really jump out are verticillium in canola, Aphanomyces root rot in peas, and bacterial leaf streak in wheat. So what I would suggest is, so this is verticillium in canola, and if you're not familiar with the symptoms of verticillium, which can sometimes be hard to recognize, it would be a good idea to spend some time on the Canola Council of Canada's website, looking at the encyclopedia for and find verticillium in there. There's a lot of good information about how to recognize it, how to prevent it, how to get it tested, what to do about it. And so that would be a great place to go. But the first thing you're going to want to do is be able to recognize what some of these symptoms are, so that if you see anything suspicious, you can have it tested. Second one is Aphanomyces root rot in pea and lentil. And probably not a lot of lentil acres in the piece, but certainly there's pea acres. And root rots are common in pea and lentil all over the province, and Fusarium is often the most commonly occurring root rot pathogen. So Fusarium is present just about everywhere that we grow peas. So if you see root rot in peas, it's very likely that Fusarium is there, and at least part of a complex of organisms causing root rot. But Aphanomyces, if it's introduced to a field, is really challenging to manage, and you have to manage it in a very different way than you would manage Fusarium. And so it's really important to know if you have Aphanomyces root rot in a field, and then you may need to just extend your rotation and not grow peas there until the Aphanomyces risk levels drop. And there's some really good information on Sask Pulse's website on Aphanomyces management, and that would probably be the best place to go to find information on how to evaluate risk and determine whether a pea or lentil crop is going to be a good fit on a field that has had a history of Aphanomyces. And then the last one I'll mention just is bacterial leaf streak in wheat and barley. This isn't a new disease, but it's kind of been an emerging disease over about the last 8 years. And so we are starting to see reports of it in the piece. And so it's something to watch for. And the reason I mention this is that, if you see these bacterial leaf streak symptoms, like what I'm showing here, this isn't going to respond to a fungicide because it's not a fungus, it's a bacterial infection. And so you have to manage this differently than you do the fungal leaf spots. So again, be ready to recognize bacterial leaf streak if it shows up, and then use the management practices that are specific to it, which kind of revolve around crop rotation and seed testing. There is some work being done on evaluating varieties for tolerance. That work is still in progress. Okay, so the last thing I want to just mention is I mentioned a couple of places to go to get information about disease management, but another good place, another good resource that you could use to get information and even in-season updates is the Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network. And so if you're not familiar with the Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network, it probably would be good to check it out and see if there's information there that might be useful to you. Bottom here, I have some disease scouting cards. There's also management strategies and other recommendations. So it's a good place to go and see if there's things there that are going to be useful for you. So I apologize that I'm not there in person or speaking in person. But if you do have questions, you can email them to me, and I'll be happy to provide any information that I have that might be helpful. Thanks again for the opportunity to present some of our crop disease monitoring results. And I hope something in here has been useful for you, and I hope you have a great season in 2026.